Welcome to the Communist Labor Party podcast. Here we feature presentations and educational pieces we feel are important in the fight against capitalism. In this episode, we return to Sophia Burns of the CLP and of RATPAC, the Revolutionary Alliance of Trans People Against Capitalism, and the Q&A session of her presentation on guarding radical movements against patriarchal rule. Let's join her now.
All right. We have maybe 15 or 20 minutes left. If we just take that long, we'll be back on schedule. I would like... Is that just... Okay. I am gonna open the floor now to... Well, actually, there's two things I can do. I could open it to debate and discussion and just call on people, or I can say, why don't we go around the circle and everyone takes, a minute or so to talk about, if they're comfortable, talk about their own experiences and activism with regards to gender and gender roles and toxic masculinity. Temperature check. Who wants option one? Raise your hand. For just general discussion. Okay, who wants option two? Go around the circle and share experiences. Okay, option one has it. Who wants to be in the stack? I saw you, Max, then B, then Saoirse. Yeah?
I had a question to lean on your experience with feminist studies. To what extent do you think that? So I've got this idea floating around in my head that the reason that these more confrontational, more violent acts are coded masculine is not so much that they are more masculine things to do, but that because they are effectual and violent, that is a power that is only the carte blanche to use that power is only granted to masculine people under patriarchy, but I believe the inverse is also true, that the toxic masculine component is definitely an element where these where traditionally feminine activities are effectual are coded ineffectual because they are feminine. I think that both are going on, but to what extent do you think the balance is in that question?
Well, I think that, a question that gets at is, do men do masculine labor and women and femmes do feminine labor because of how that labor is coded and that's how they get assigned to those roles, or is that labor thusly coded because of who does it? And I mean, the answer is yes. It's a feedback loop, and each of those parts sustains and furthers the other. But I definitely, would agree that because toxic masculinity associates power, getting shit done, violence, and masculinity and maleness together, that it's a schema. You see something happening in one part of that and you assume it must be the others. You think getting shit done, and you're more likely to think manly men with rifles driving the cops away than, their sisters or girlfriends or whoever taking care of elderly mom and dad at home. Even though, if you're going to talk about power, without the socially reproductive labor, nothing else happens. Nothing can happen. If every woman and femme went totally on strike for a week, nothing would exist at the end of that week. Saoirse was next in the set. I do think that part of it is making it visible, making it acknowledged as, work, that somebody is doing work to make each of these things happen, that it doesn't just, there is no snack time fairy that just brings out the chips and salsa. It's a person who did that and got that ready, and it's usually a woman. So yeah, I do think that, not just individuals stepping forward and saying, hey, I did this thing, but groups having deliberate collective choices and procedures to say, okay, we have people who are doing these things for us, otherwise we would have fallen apart long ago. Let's publicly acknowledge that work. Let's publicly acknowledge and, give some kudos, give some prestige to the people who are doing it. Like, say, hey, you did really good job getting, the table and the chairs in here and making sure that the place was cleaned and getting the dishes ready. That was really important work. And thank you for doing that. And we respect you for doing that. That's part of it. But I think that the other half is, so, if we look at the goal is obviously not to say let's abolish masculinized labor or let's abolish feminized labor, because, it's a division of the types of work that do need to be done. I think what the goal should be is to remove the gendered aspect to who does what, remove the erasure and the invisibilization, and bring up the prestige on feminized work and care work, so that it is on a level with going out and getting arrested or being a union organizer and going on strike. But what that means is, men in masks, y'all gotta step up and do it. The only way that we will degender this work is to have men and masculine people do the types of work that they are not used to doing.
I have a comment from somebody on the live stream. Sam and Lacey says that they get coded very ambiguously. They often tend, I'm going to quote, I often get coded very ambiguously. I often tend toward socially reproductive activism. When I do step into a position of power in a socially reproductive way, I've been criticized for being successful. Would you care to speak to non-binary gender fuckery of the gender binary as it applies to this kind of labor situation?
I would actually really love to address that, especially, speaking from my own social position, not just as a trans woman, but as a non-binary person, as a non-binary trans woman. Part of the way that this, system works is, there's an assignment of gender that happens not just at birth, but literally every day, every encounter that you have with any person. You are constantly being assigned and assigned and assigned. And one of the really, really damaging parts of that is that a large percentage of the time, someone who isn't binary is going to get non-consensually and coercively pushed into one binary role or other. I do think that, like I mentioned earlier, regardless of the gender of the person that does the particular work, the way that that work is gendered will have a lot to do with, the degree of respect it gets and the degree to which it's really revolutionary. And, any of us could name a dozen examples of, like, people who aren't male getting a lot of respect for occupying these more revolutionary roles. But the thing is, they have to do that by adopting the value system that says that radicalism means confrontation and violence and eschewing care work and renouncing feminized labor. But yeah, it doesn't neatly map onto any given person's identity, and it certainly doesn't map onto how people and our genders actually are in real life. One of the fucked up things, of course, is that, there's plenty of people who aren't women that would be totally great at care work and really happy doing it, but patriarchy doesn't give them the opportunity. And, if you're a male assigned person and you put yourself in a more feminized role, pardon the language, but what does that make you? Makes you a fag, makes you a tranny or whatever. So yeah, part of masculinity is the fact that or toxic masculinity is the fact that there is this large coercive apparatus to prevent people from stepping into roles that, they prefer and that are more consistent with their identity.
With regards to the non-binary question, I'm a trans woman, and I sometimes experiment with non-binary presentations or gender fuck sort of things. And even in the short time that I've been doing it, I've noticed that sometimes I think people might not be super comfortable asking or even accepting my offers to do certain work. I think that appearance is in our society subtly used as a way to help assign labor, not just to reward people for it. And I think that's it's especially noticeable in volunteer situations. So I'd like people to also be conscious of that. That maybe just because I that I'm active or I'm going to have problems with whatever task is being assigned or at whatever task I'm offering to do.
Yeah, and I think that, some of what that gets at, as well as actually a lot of what Tim was saying, you look at the, traditions of Marxist feminism and a lot of the analytical work that's been done there, and, this is totally not something limited to activist groups or to volunteer groups. When I said that we are all getting assigned over and over and over all day, every time we interact with somebody, what are the actual pragmatic consequences of that assignment? It's not just, whether somebody will use one pronoun or a different pronoun or whatever. It's whether or not in that situation you'll be expected to do socially reproductive labor or not. It's whether you'll be someone who, can talk about, ideas and doing things and, be taken seriously, or whether you're expected to be someone who doesn't talk so much, who listens, who nods, who is supportive, who maybe expresses emotions other than, anger and angst. And what it is concretely is very much an assignment of, it's a job assignment. Every single encounter you have with someone, gendering is the assignment of work, and that, goes into a lot of radical feminist theory, but it also, in Marxist feminism, plays into how capitalism works, because, there's, a mind-bogglingly massive amount of socially reproductive labor that has to get done every hour of every day, or else things literally don't happen. But overwhelmingly, that work is unpaid, or when it is paid, I work in a caring profession. I'm CNA in elder care, and I make substantially less than, someone in a more masculinized profession, even within the medical industry would. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, like, okay, we'll pay you for caretaking, but isn't that something that women do for free anyway? Like, by not paying for socially reproductive labor, the capitalist class saves a whole lot of money on wages. And, they do benefit from the value that work produces by having things happen, but they don't pay for it. And the fact of patriarchy and the fact of these gender roles and these assignments and power differentials is a way for the capitalist class to weasel out of having to pay people for the work of social reproduction. So, it's been said, and I think rightly, that capitalism probably couldn't exist without the labor of social reproduction being feminized and being invisibilized and being done for free. We are just about out of time. Does anyone have any last comments? Miles and... Okay,
So when you're talking about like feminized labor and the fact that like online activism, like when I was saying about online activism not being considered real work, like you're just a keyboard warrior. I was thinking about stuff like call out culture and like the education, which seems like that I see like on Facebook and Tumblr and other social media, and it seems like a lot of that can get really aggressive as far as calling out or as far as like people's like personal essays or praxis or whatever. My praxis is better than your praxis. Is that still that? It feels like it's still very feminized.
well, thinking about that, there's two angles I would take there. And first off, background information for anyone who isn't necessarily familiar with these internet subcultures. You get a lot of people who feel really, really strongly about not just a lot of political issues, but a lot of the political implications of, the pop culture that they enjoy. And often that can get extremely emotionally violent, really nasty people getting told literally that they are worthless people who should go commit suicide because they don't have the correct ideas or don't express sufficient outrage about what happened in Supernatural last week or whatever. Like it sounds like an exaggeration, but it really isn't. But what I would say about that are two things. Firstly, a lot of the social capital that you can get in those spaces, you're more popular if you're more radical. And how do you prove you're more radical? By being more emotionally abusive to more people. Yeah, and in other words, by demonstrating that you can internalize and you can enact the values of toxic masculinity. That say that more radical means more confrontational and more violent and more hostile. Secondly, I will say, like, these are, this online subculture is predominantly, like, majority women. And, with any subculture, like, there's stuff that gets acknowledged as work, but there's also all the socially reproductive labor that goes into it. And in the context of, that online space, what is it that sustains the posts that call people out? It's everybody who comments and says, oh, wow, that's terrible, who, performs in much smaller ways the emotional outrage that And when I say perform, I don't, mean to imply that it can't be sincere, but perform in the sense that you do it publicly so people can see it. And it's that ongoing performance of emotional outrage that keeps the subculture going. Even people who participate and no one in the subculture has heard their names, do that because that keeps it going. And that is emotional labor. And that is a type of social reproduction. And that is feminized labor because that's what emotional labor is. And a lot of what you see, in terms of these call out posts or whatever, are people being publicly criticized and humiliated and shamed for not adequately demonstrating a sufficient degree of outrage at a sufficient number of things. So you have a subculture that sustains itself on the emotional labor of women and keeps that emotional labor coming by threatening predominantly women with emotional violence if they don't do that emotional labor to everyone's satisfaction. So it's actually very much a very concentrated replication of some of the larger dynamics of gendered labor. All right, we're a little over time, but we started a little late. Anybody have one last thing to say? All right, thank y'all so much. Yeah.
And that was Sophia Burns of the CLP and of RATPAC concluding her presentation on feminism, gender, and guarding against patriarchal rule in revolutionary movements. If you enjoyed this content, please like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast for more revolutionary presentations, commentary, and workshops. This has been the CLP Podcast. Thank you for listening.